right? So now I pass to Emmanuela, another excellent student, who is now in Santa Barbara. But Emmanuela started her studies at the University of Crete. She was class valedictorian here, and then she moved to Heidelberg, where she completed a master's degree on narratology, ancient tragedy. These are the topics in general. And after Heidelberg, she was accepted to University of California, Santa Barbara with a fellowship. And there she does, she has been doing very pioneering topics. And so she studies classics, public humanities and digital humanities. So she tries to connect these threads, and part of this research will be presented today. So Emmanuela, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to make digital humanities, but I will come to this. So good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure really to be back at GEME and the company of colleagues and very interesting topics. It's really innovative research. The Q&A, I really loved it. So I've listened with great interest and I got even inspired. So the title of the presentation speaks to something that often remains in the background of academic discussions, but is fundamental to how we create scholarship. So I'm going to be talking about the process itself, our methodologies, and the ways we develop our ideas. So this actually was a talk that was inspired by a stimulating discussion that I had with Professor Papadopoulou 2 weeks ago on Zoom. And while we were discussing, it came to my mind the act of weaving organically, the act of connecting different ways and knowledges, and how the physical embodiment of creating with our hands and bodies can inform our scholarly writing, because we have been talking about the different paths. So this reflection on methodology seems worthwhile because it has the potential to deepen connection with broader global conversation on antiquity, not just the Mediterranean, not just Roman or Greek. So the process through which we arrive at our findings may be just as important as the findings themselves in creating meaningful intellectual exchange. That's why I would like to begin with this metaphor that speaks to both humanistic and scientific inquiry, the physical act of weaving. Just as weavers bring together various threads to create one coherent, stronger fabric, research has been about weaving together seemingly disparate strands into a meaningful whole. So in my case, this wasn't a predetermined methodology, but rather it emerged as my academic path also emerged throughout different places. The image of my grandmother and other women in her village in Kissamos, Western Crete, weaving, mending, talking, needleworking represents an act of connection deeply embedded also in my approach. So this practice has become valuable across different academic contexts I have been and I have anchored myself. So it's not just a merely personal memory, but also a methodology that continues to resonate throughout me as a professional. So that's why I'm talking about cross-disciplinary and trans-disciplinary approaches, because this is the way I can feel that my work, like I get motivated to keep working on different things in this complex and very turbulent world. So one way to find this for me was through collaborative work with diverse groups. And this is what I found valuable in breaking down the artificial academic and very narrow paths and boundaries and creating connections between not only disciplines, but also outside of them. So this is kind of my methodology, let's say. So I would like to focus now on these three threads by just going over three case studies that demonstrate how this approach works. So these different things I'm gonna say represent different aspects of my current research, and it's weaving together classical studies with contemporary concerns and some methodologies I learned, especially in the US. So the first thread is classics, right? And I am focusing on displacement and agency. The second is going to be the social justice pedagogy and carceral pedagogy and community engagement. And the third is going to be computational classics and digital humanities. Oh, that looks bad. That's a bad choice. Ναι. Ακόμα, ναι, καμία σχέση. Yeah, the colors are different here. Anyway, now understand Evangelos about the blue lines. So let's start with the first thread.
Attention to detail, that's a classicist.
My dissertation projects begin with a big interest in the vulnerability of life, belonging, the agency that heroes or, like any kind of, I was interested always in the protagonists. So migration and also secondary roles. So migration emerged as a powerful lens which I could explore these kind of things, particularly as I was myself an immigrant, and also all this displacement crisis that they have been happening while I was, growing up. So through my work, I have been developing in the dissertation something that might be described as a phenomenology of displacement or forced migration, asking how displaced communities depicted in literature and how communities in general experience the world and how the interaction between people are twisted or transfigured by their own displacement. So this understanding of real world experience then becomes also a way to explore the representation of displaced collectives, especially in ancient Greek tragedy. And I'm especially interested in women and children. So I will just bring a very brief example because I have also given this talk some years ago or a similar one on Aeschylus women here. So this tragedy portrays displaced young unmarried women fleeing sexual and institutional violence and persecution in Egypt from their own cousins and seeking asylum in Argos. So my research suggests, this is one of my chapters in the dissertation, that they achieve agency and security through a paradoxical migrational identity and strategy. So they stage themselves both as refugees escaping this kind of violence of the hetero marriage without their consent. And at the same time, they present themselves as a Greek diaspora returning to their homeland that only this very old female ancestor of theirs knew and has inhabited, that she has also been prosecuted and migrated to the Nile in the past of their own family. So this has been my argument, and I went out of this asylum or Athenian democracy discussions, and the whole pattern I would like also in the monograph in the future to show is that we can go beyond asylum cases and go to the overarching category that is displacement and migration, and focus rather than the system that holds the theater roles, to go to the direction of, okay, how does this happen aesthetically? What does this mean? And focus on this kind of movement. So what began as traditional classical studies research has evolved in the transdisciplinary approach that connects ancient literature with contemporary realities, guided by the question, how do we understand the experience of forced migration across different literary and historical contexts? So the evolution of my work has continued to expand in exciting directions since last year. Now it's the second year. So building on the foundation in studying displacement in ancient Greek tragedy, I've been fortunate to collaborate with a newly established Low Research Language Lab at the University of Santa Barbara, where I am developing a fourth chapter where I approach these tragedies I am focusing on the previous ones, and creating a relational data set of all displaced collective groups, might be choruses, but also fragmented subgroups, with the goal of producing network graphs that visualize displacement routes and reveal recurring patterns. I can go in detail later how is the data set so far, but I use very simple things in the Python, and I'm now learning and the Jeffy. So like simple packages for some, and I'm very happy to listen if you have any thoughts about it.
Professor Angelina is the culprit.
Yes, she is. So what I find compelling about this approach is how it allows us to see patterns that might not be immediately apparent through the traditional close reading alone. That's why I would like to listen to your presentation. Anyway, by mapping this ancient displacement experience, we can better understand the structural elements that characterize collective migration in Greek drama, and patterns that may even resonate with contemporary displacement experience in new ways. So both this cross-pollination of both sides could be very interesting to check the patterns. And also it's absolutely fascinating how in the ancient Mediterranean and the Mediterranean right now, we have movements that have been happening and keep happening, and which is the ways that these two collapse or overlap. So the second thread is social pedagogy and carceral engagement. You can change them, and I hope you can. Oh no!
Let's start talking, and I will try.
This is so sad. I hope you see better. Yeah, you see better there. Yeah. Okay.
What is
So
This is only for this affects
Yeah.
only here,
yeah.
not online.
Yeah. So my journey on social justice pedagogy began with public-facing projects that brought classical text.
Εδώ είναι κάπως καλύτερο.
Ναι, στο άλλο.
Προηγούμενο.
Let's give a moment here.
Yeah, you can.
I can keep going on.
Yeah, okay, great.
Όχι, πίσω. Εδώ. Να το, εδώ. Άστο εκεί.
We have some technical problems of visibility for here. That's why we stopped.
Yeah, you can go on.
Εδώ είναι μια χαρά.
I think-
Βλέπω καλά εκεί.
Okay. I'm just giving some definitions about social justice and public humanities. So, yes, when did this thread came into my life? Quite early, while I was doing my master's, I initiated an Odyssey reading project in Heidelberg, where I was studying. So this involved 6 languages and 12 collaborators reading in modern and ancient languages, The Journey of Odysseus in book 11. So this experience taught me how the power of making ancient poems accessible and relevant to diverse publics. So when I arrived in the US, this involved a more structured social justice work. I came to understand social justice as seeking fair and equitable treatment for all, encompassing wealth and privilege distribution and human rights, serving as both theoretical framework and praxis for social reform. And public humanities became the work of engaging diverse publics in interacting with humanities scholarship through community engagement pedagogy. So this led me to participate in two fantastic and unique theater and creative writing products that are led by Professor Michael Morgan and one of my amazing colleagues, Dr. Olga Fakani. So there is the Odyssey project and the Trojan Women project. So Michael, I had the luck to be a teaching assistant and also collaborator in these two projects. That it's courses that bring UC students and incarcerated people or formerly incarcerated people together as artist activists and reconstruct ancient Greek texts, the Odyssey or the Trojan Women, through digital storytelling, performing. Was fantastic. So we created this space again and again through, like, I'm doing this 3 or 4 years now, where ancient Greek texts become tools for dialogue, self-discovery, creation, connection, and agency. Especially the Trojan Women project was quite transformative because they have been mainly female. We have been in a female, we were collaborating with a female prison, incarcerated people. So working with them and with the Trojan women, rewriting the plays that speaks profoundly to themes of loss, survival, agency, resilience. The people really connected to it. So it was not just a distant artifact for them to get into the specific roles, but it was in this carceral setting that it really continued to breathe in very powerful ways for their lives and later on. So we work together through creative writing and performance, and we try also to mirror in some pedagogical modules the chorus in the ancient play, where the women's song, movement, and collective lamentation transform grief into an act of resilience. So the play then it talks more about survival and dispossession of women whose futures are determined by systems of power, but still they do have the agency to move things. So the youth incarceration today forced us to confront the same foundational questions that the Trojan women have: who is given the right to rebuild their life, who is granted agency, and who is denied. So this work connects both ancient Greek drama and contemporary struggles for social justice, transforming classical studies in a site of engagement and collective empowerment. It's also a study case that I'm talking in my second chapter, where I'm also working on Trojan women and bringing into connections of the themes of agency. So the third computational class in the LOREL Lab, and the new era for me that really helped me to bring a new dimension in my journey, has been a luck to get into my fabric. So I want to talk about a little bit about the low research language lab that you also, Rafael, probably are gonna go. So
That's on record there.
Yeah, maybe. That we call, what we call low resource, is the scarce, endangered, and ancient languages, along with connected cultural communities of nowadays, like indigenous languages. We develop new techniques in data science and machine learning for linguistic datasets that are small, complex, or fragmented. What I find particularly valuable about the lab is that it's both a research and a teaching space, prioritizing opportunities always for students at all levels to gain hands-on experience with professional research without hierarchies. I want to share two projects. So the very first project of the lab, 1.5 years ago, started, and it was about catastrophe narratives from oral histories. So graduate students with our professor, we mainly, curated and analyzed about 30 interviews from Nakba survivors, recorded and translated by the Nakba Archive. It's a grassroots oral history collective based in Palestine. The Nakba refers to the 1948 mass displacement over 700,000 Palestinians, producing actually the longest ongoing refugee crisis to date. So what we did, it was like geotagging spatial data. So we geotagged every place named in the transcripts, along with the metadata like interviewee gender, interview dates. So we found two significant patterns. Interviewee gender correlated with how often and which places were named, and those whose birthplaces were depopulated tended to include fewer named locations within a tighter geographic range. And that's why we start talking about cognitive geographies, and we published a relevant article. So we interpreted these as patterns in cognitive geographies and how people mentally travel after catastrophic experience that has to do with a forced displacement. Actually, you can change the slide. Thank you. I have to find the workshop. At every step, we maintain an ethical focus, centering the narratives of displaced people, questioning our claims and limitations, and collectively reflecting on our positions and privileges. This kept ethics in the body of our work rather than just a perfunctory paragraph. We published our structured dataset also in the Harvard Dataverse to ensure openness and accessibility, something that I know that you also do here. So in another project, we have been examining migration patterns, and you can see there one of the posters of our undergrads. Migration patterns in the Mediterranean using the Missing Migrants database from International Organization of Migration, IOM, investigating whose deaths and tragedies are recorded and whose are not. We're expanding this into a comparative migration project, mapping incidents of disappearance across two regions that occupy similar geopolitical positions. And it's really innovative. Nobody has ever thought about it. So the Eastern Mediterranean and the US-Mexico border, Greece and Mexico. Our analysis showed how deterrence-based border policies in both regions create structural conditions of death and disappearance, whether through maritime pushbacks, we all know here in the Aegean, or militarized land routes that they use the desert and the river. What I find most meaningful about this work with undergrads and graduate students is how it embodies, again, ethical collaboration, rooted in mutual support, open mentorship, and shared authorship. 5 undergraduate students have already contributed to data cleaning, analysis, and writing, with one even serving as first author on a chapter in the forthcoming debates in Latinx Digital Humanities. So this computational approach allowed us to make visible which policies seek to make, to make visible those policies that often render invisible, and we try to connecting ancient studies to global humanitarian realities in ways that traditional scholarship might not achieve. So, what do we learn from these 3 threads I brought together today? For me, it's a kind of vision of scholarship that is fundamentally interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, and I intentionally use the trans-disciplinary. So in the sense that it can be more inclusive and accessible beyond the academia, but also within, creating a more well-rounded scholarship through new practices and synergies that they can break down these boundaries between different world knowledges, like the indigenous knowledges beyond the Western style. That's why I also brought the weaving metaphor that began in this presentation, how classical studies can be enriched when connected to indigenous and migrational knowledges, transnational perspectives, and in general, decolonial thought, not only thought, but also praxis. So through the social justice work, I've seen how theater-based classics can create spaces for ethical frameworks. And the computational work has demonstrated how digital methods can make ancient studies more globally relevant while maintaining ethical commitments to the communities whose stories we study. So I would like also to mention how the vision for me of a global antiquity studies isn't just adding new methodologies to old approaches, but it's rather to reconceptualize what classical studies can be when it's embracing collaboration and recognize that there are no boundaries between different ways of knowing. So I hope that, yeah, like we don't need, the scholarship doesn't need to choose between tradition or innovation, or between theory or practice, or between ancient and contemporary realities, and that we can weave things together, and we can learn something that can illuminate not only the past, but also they can be deeply engaged in the present. So I believe this transdisciplinary approach offers not just better scholarship, but more meaningful scholarship that connects across time and space, that acknowledges power structures, and that works toward great equity in both our methods and our outcomes. So the question before us, for me, is like how we might all embracing this kind of melting, weaving, and how we might work towards connections that make our scholarship stronger and more relevant to the world we inhabit. Thank you.
Very inspiring talk. It gave us a lot of ideas and connections as well.
Okay.